Private viewing only.
No, I think it's just the interaction part is going to be important today, so we'll start with that. Do we have a Veterans Day off next week? The
No.
week after? No.
No. We don't even get Thanksgiving off.
Ooh, Spider-Man. This one is really funny. This is really, really funny. Yeah.
I've seen parts
It's
of it.
it's called Cinema Sins. It talks about how nonsense keeps spewing out of certain movies. So it's really kind of cool.
Oh, I found out about Android developers bridge tool, Monkey. It's a very fun thing to watch it when it's working.
Okay.
It basically automates testing, so it'll send random gestures to the tablet or phone controlling a particular app. It's just fun watching it. It looks like it's possessed.
Well, when you remote into somebody else's screen, it would appear that your computer is possessed as well, right? I cannot type my own password today. All right, so we'll get started today. Today we have quite a few topics to go over. The first one is the homework assignment, which is due today, and I'm hoping that most of you got it done, and kind of have fun doing it too. No, not really. Okay, so we'll get that one out of the way first, and then I have where is it here? The project plan. Oh, it's still hidden. Why is it still hidden? This is the one that I want to talk about today later, after we talk about the homework assignment. Oh, okay, that's why. Okay, I'm gonna.
Overdue.
Okay, let me deal with this one first. Just so that you guys can. It's off by a whole year. That is why. That's why it's complaining. It's like, yeah, it's closed. 2014. That might help. And it's gonna be 2014. It's going to be a third for a Monday. Okay. So this one is due in a week. I will talk about this one, once I'm done with the homework assignment. So let's go back to the homework assignment, which is directional tracker that shoots. And I have seen some of your projects, so that's pretty good. I mean, you guys were having fun with that part. Okay, so I'm just reviewing what the homework is supposed to do, and then I'll go ahead and actually do it. The important part is not the end result. Okay, the part that I think that the important part is how to get about doing it. Okay, because once you learn the method of how to do something, then it doesn't matter whether it is a homework assignment like this or some other programming homework assignment. It is the approach that is important. So with this one, I want you to use tracker with directions as a starting point. This time add a second and a third image sprites to the project. Keep these image sprites hidden until they are needed. So originally, just kind of display the same thing, a circle and your original drone plane if you already have that being visible to begin with. During the actual flight of the original sprite, not during the drag event, if the user touches somewhere on the canvas, in other words, after the delay and the drone starts to fly, and by default it also draws a line, and I did not ask you to remove the drawing of the line, so you can keep it if you want to. If the user touches anywhere on the canvas other than the sprite in motion, use the third sprite to mark the location and launch the second image sprite to that location. Account for the fact that the XY coordinate of an image sprite is the upper left corner, but the rotation is around its center. This is the problem of why it doesn't seem to be heading in the right direction, because if you do not take into consideration that the rotation is based on the center of the entire image sprite, but the location, quote-unquote location of the sprite is actually referring only to the upper left corner before rotation, then it's not going to look right. Use the math we discussed in class to move the center of a sprite instead of its upper left corner. Now, because we did this in class, I gave you a subroutine to do this. So essentially, someone can have absolutely no idea about the math of the whole thing and still be able to do this part just by calling the right procedure, the right subroutine to do it. When the second sprite touches the third sprite, stop the second sprite. You can also add sound effects if you want to at that time, and or change the images of the sprite to make it more fun. Okay, so that part is entirely up to you, but the minimum is you have to implement what is already described here in the homework assignment. All right, so now that we know what we are supposed to do, we'll go back and say, okay, let's start with tracker done, which is the one that is directional. So we'll use it as a starting point for this particular homework assignment. And it helps to start up App Inventor. And I'm just going to use this account. It's reminding me of stuff. And I think I got it done already last time with this account. So let me just double check because I don't need to redo it if it is already done. Right. So we'll go ahead and start AI Starter. In Windows, do you guys have to start up AI Starter manually as well?
I do because I
think you do.
To do it manually.
Yeah.
If I leave it alone, it sets it to do it automatic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anything extra starting.
Even in Windows, it would do it automatically?
Windows, yeah, it does it automatically.
Mm-hmm.
I just set it to be manual.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want
Stick shift.
Yeah. I don't want any extra services running that I don't have to.
Actually, this brings up an interesting point. You can see how my brain works. It's almost like it's like playing pool. So once you start, it's like an idea knocking the is it 9, 1, 2, 3, 10 balls. So they all scatter into different directions. Some will get into pockets, but most won't, right? But anyway, since we were talking about AI and stuff like that, the CEO of Tesla, Elon Musk. So he apparently over the weekend he made some interesting comments about the use of AI will be the doom of us all, or something to that effect.
Well, that's just balancing out doggone Ray
Terminator
Kurzweil,
Alert.
who's ready to be chipped.
Yeah.
He's ready to have his consciousness downloaded to a chip so he can be immortal.
Yep. Go ahead. An event with a procedure? Well, in the event block, you can just call a procedure. A procedure is just, a piece of code that is sitting around waiting to be invoked, and you can invoke it from anywhere.
I have a move to procedure that's already running.
Okay.
And I want to associate that with the Canvas event.
Okay.
And right now, there's no way for me to get the blocks to match up.
Okay. Well, as I do this, maybe at the right time you see something and you can ask that question, because it seems kind of odd that you cannot call a procedure from inside a event handler. But let me just do this one first. Let me get this one out of the way, and then we'll do the rest. So I'm dragging the circular ball around, and then the arrow is now following. So this part is done. And you were allowed to use this as a starting point. In other words, you don't have to start from scratch or your own previous homework assignment. You can use this one as a starting point, which I am hoping that it will save some time. Okay, so now that we have this part done, we just have to choose, 2 additional images to upload. One which is sprite 3 for marking the location, and one which is sprite 2 to mark the thing that is going to fly to the destination. Yes?
I have a small question.
Yes.
Obviously, you could do a 4th image, right? But I'm asking, is there some way in this program that you could call to change the image of a sprite to a new image?
Yes, you can.
You can? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
I was trying to play with the thing last night with, blowing something up, and I just kind of failed at that, so I stayed. But if I had, that would work to change the image to an explosion, sort of, kind of like, right?
Yeah, you can do that. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to find, 2 additional images, one which is my sprite 3 to mark the location, and one which is my sprite 2 to indicate, the thing that is flying to the other sprite. So to make this kind of fun, we'll look for Barbie and Ken.
Barbie and Ken. How about an ISIS flag?
That might be a little bit, political.
Yeah, they
So I'm
Really?
gonna choose something that
You
is.
think that's political?
Yeah.
You're not going to take off for that, right? They are considered a terrorist group. I hope not. That's what I use. I use them as a target.
I'm pretty sure the British also considered the colonists terrorists at the time.
The what?
I'm not. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
So
understand.
so that's.
I know we've sort of, they've been very clear about their.
That part is a little bit.
Their main objectives.
All right. So we have the file saved. We're gonna open it, and we'll go ahead and extract 2 images out of it. Okay. We'll use one for sprite 3. We'll use one for sprite 2. So who do you want to be waiting, and who is going to be the one flying? Do you want to send Barbie flying or send Ken flying?
Oh, that's
Barbie
just
flying.
awful.
Send Barbie flying? Okay, let's do that.
That's domestic violence.
No, she's attracted to Ken, right?
Okay.
I mean,
Oh, I see. That could be a. I guess I understand.
So we don't need to use the entire sprite. We can just cut off certain parts of it. Hope nobody minds if I cut off just the head portion of Ken. So we'll just copy this portion, and in the GIMP, it has a really nice feature. You can create from clipboard. So now we can have just a picture of the handsome, Ken doll as my, sprite 3. Now this sprite is already kind of too big, because it's 516 by 472. I just need it to be about 30 by 30 would be pretty good. So I will select all first, and then go. I don't need to select anything actually, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter. Rescale the image to around 30 by 27. That seems good. Rescale, and that's Ken right here. We export this to the temp folder, and we'll just call that can.png. And here's the export. Oh, I forgot to do one thing. I forgot to make the background transparent, but that's okay. We don't need to do that. And now here's Barbie's turn. And for Barbie, let's just make it slightly more directional like that. Now, because you guys remember the direction, in 0 degrees is facing east. So what I need to do is to turn this one to face east first. Otherwise, the direction won't look right. So I'm gonna first extract the image. So we'll go to here and say copy, and then create from clipboard. And here's Barbie. And we'll make the image rotate that way, 90 degrees, and rescale. I hope this is not offending anyone. I hope there are no Barbie collectors here.
She's not a real person.
But some people seem to think that she is.
Based off the creator.
I like it when in one of the Simpsons episode, I think it was Lisa, who was playing with a. They don't call it Barbie. They call it somebody else, right? Huh? Marcy? No.
I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, when she was playing with it and released the string, the dog was saying, math is hard.
Yes, it is.
And this is Barbie PNG. need to save anything here, we can just discard all the changes. There we go. And close the GIMP. Now we can get back to here and create the 2 additional files first. So we'll go ahead and upload these 2 files. I think I can only upload one at a time. So Ken goes first, and then Barbie.
Way around it. In this case, it's more trouble than it's worth.
Sorry?
There's a way around that, but in this case, it's more trouble than it's worth. If you download the .aia, put both of them in the assets folder, and re-upload.
Oh.
It's great when you have to install a lot.
If you have a lot of images, yes, that will save some time.
Great.
Well, it's great for animation, because if you want to do any type of animation where you want to flip from one image to the next and you have like 20 images to make up for one single sequence of animation, then that approach would work, because it will just save you time, from having to re-upload one image at a time. All right, so now we can go to drawing and animation and give us 2 additional image sprites. 1, 2. There we go. So I'll just keep the name, the image sprite 2, which is the one that's going to be launched, and then image sprite 3, which is the one that marks the location where image sprite 2 is supposed to go. All right, so we got all of the components now. We just have to associate image sprite 2 to, which one was the one that's going to fly? Barbie. So Barbie is flying. All right. And Ken is the one that is not flying. So here's Ken. Go. I did not rotate Ken, just because that particular one does not need to be rotated, so I didn't even bother to rotate it to the orientation, to the 0-degree orientation. So now we have all the chunks that we need. We can now go to blocks and start to integrate the logic into it. All right. So there are 2 things that we need to do. We need to detect a touch event on the canvas, not on the sprite, okay? Because we need to click on a space on the canvas that does not have a sprite on it for that event to be captured, and that is not being captured at this point. So we have to create a new block to do it. How did we do? Okay, so we have this already. When canvas is touched, we basically say clear the screen and create an empty list. So we need to put a conditional statement in here to basically say, okay, it depends on something. Sometimes we do one block of code and other times we do the other block of code. So we have to add an else case here so that we can decide, okay, which one is it this time? Okay, are we supposed to clear the screen, or are we supposed to start the process to shoot, in this case, Barbie to Ken? It just sounds funny, but that's okay. So are we doing okay so far with the reason why we need to have a conditional statement? Because without the conditional statement, it's going to clear the screen every single time, okay? Which is not what you intend to do, and it will also empty the list, which is also not what you want to do. Okay. So now the question is, okay, what am I going to use here to decide which way to go with the conditional statement? Okay, that is the question. What do you guys think? I'm going to move it over here so we have a little bit more space, because otherwise it will just kind of use up it will overlap with the other block. Okay, so how do we decide? How do we know that we are actually already, quote unquote, in flight?
Timer is enabled.
There are several ones, the timer, there's one timer that is only enabled when it is in flight. Yep.
Well, I mean, if you have when canvas is when it's touched, you really don't have to test for that, because in this particular program, that's what we're doing. Once we touch the canvas, something is already in flight. Correct?
Nope. That's, well, kind of.
I mean,
but there's the original code here too, so you will have to remove this code, and then put it somewhere else, because you still need a way to reset the screen originally. Okay, so in this case, we're gonna go to the detection of whether the timer is already on. So we go to clock draw, which is supposed to be enabled only when the sprite is in flight. So we go to the enable flag here, or enabled flag and say, we'll use this as a clue as to whether we should be launching Barbie or whether we should just clear the screen. Is that okay so far? Is everybody okay with this? Okay. So according to this logic here, it is now saying, if clock draw is enabled, then we'll go ahead and launch the sequence. If not, we're going to clear the screen. Yes.
There's one other parameter, correct?
Sorry?
That the XY that is touched is not the actual drone.
It is, well, XY is going to be useful because
you said as long as it wasn't touching the drone.
If it is touching a drone, then touch sprite is going to get the drone, so you can actually compare and see if it is touching the drone.
Okay, I'm just saying what you had wrote. Okay, what you had written in the instructions. It specifically stated that as long as it's not the coordinates for the drone itself in the parentheses there, not
not the sprite in motion, but just the drone.
Not the sprite in motion, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
So there's another test for that.
There's a test for it.
Okay.
And we talked about it last time as well. Okay, because you have to detect, because it is possible for the drone to eventually meet, in this case Barbie, midway in flight, and Barbie is not supposed to stop. In that case, it should get through. So you still need to detect, which one is colliding with. So there is a way to detect that. Okay. So in this case, if you want to detect, I'll just go ahead and run it without a detection, and then we'll go ahead and fix it afterwards. Okay. All right. So what we want to do here is to start the Barbie in motion. Okay. Now, if you look at the sprite, it by default is already set up to do the animation. It's just that because of the speed is 0, that is not moving. So in this case, we have to change the location of the Barbie sprite, make it show up, change the heading, and then just say, okay, go at a certain speed, and that's all we need to do with this code here. So there are several things to do. One is go to image sprite 2 and set the visibility of image sprite 2 to true.
Could we also disable the drone too, or could we also disable the missile or Barbie in this case?
Why are we disabling?
If we did, when it gets to its target, can we also disable it rather than change its speed to 0?
You can do either one.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so we have to do the same thing with image sprite 3. So we just duplicate this block and attach it here. Image sprite 3. So now we have both of the sprites showing up on screen. Before we show both of them on screen, it's probably a good idea to set their locations right first. Okay, so we'll have to set the locations, but we want to set their locations using the center of the entire image sprite instead of just the left upper left corner. So we want to use the procedure that we have been using already, which is call move center of image sprite, and we need 2 of these blocks because we got 2 sprites to move around. So the first one is image sprite 2. So we'll go to the last block here, which refers to the component itself. We attach it here. We make a duplicate of this, and we make an image sprite and attach it here. Any questions about this step? Yes.
Sorry, I tested that yesterday because I was wondering if image sprite 1 was. I noticed you haven't put image sprite 1 on there yet, but that's fine. You didn't have to necessarily use what I did was image sprite 2. I did the call function, but since image sprite 2 had already been centered, I was able to just get X and get Y, and I tested it, and it went to the center of it rather than the outside of it. So in a sense, that second, it's possible not to have to do that second call function, correct?
You mean for image sprite 3?
Right. Because I tested it a little bit, but
I guess when I
showed me that image sprite 2. If you put image sprite 2/X and image sprite 2/Y or whatever, those were actually centered because they had already been processed. So the current image sprite X. Well, I'll just I'll talk about it later.
Okay. Alright, so for image sprite 3, it is wherever we touch on the screen. For image sprite 2, the location is going to be where the drone is. So that's going to be the X and the Y of the drone, but it's going to have to be referring to the center of the drone and not referring to the upper left corner of the drone. So if you just use the X and the Y of the drone, I'm not going to take any points off. You know, it will still be okay, even though it looks off a little bit. Okay, it's got to be off. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about here? You know, why I said this is going to be off a little bit? Because, you know, we are now aiming, we are basically starting at the wrong point, because it will be starting from the upper left corner of the drone image rather than the center of the drone image. Okay, so ideally speaking, we want to move, you know, from the center. We want to use the center of the drone to become the center of Barbie in this case. Okay, this is not going to do it, but it's close. You know, I'm not going to take any points off. It'll still get most of it done. Right. So we position the two image sprites. We turn on their visibility. Oops, I put the blocks in the wrong place. Okay, put this back here, and then move this entire block to here. There we go. Okay, so now we move the sprites, we make them visible, and then the last thing we have to do is to make Barbie move. So to make Barbie move, we have to go to image sprite 2, change its speed to a non-zero value. So we'll stash it here. Maybe after we make it visible, then we can change the speed to something that is non-zero. I'll just make it 10 pixels per time per update, and it's going to be updated, you know, 10 times per second by default. All right. So we want to test this first, okay, just to see whether we can trigger Barbie to move around. Okay. So let's go back to our simulator, and it's kind of cool to have both of these. Oh, they're already on. You know, I suppose I can turn them off by doing this part here. When I'm clearing the screen, I can also make these two invisible. So we'll just duplicate this block, stash it here, and make it false, and then do the same thing with the other. So sprite 3. This is not the only way to get it to work, you know, just one way. Right? So if I touch anywhere on the screen, it will clear the background of the screen, but it will also make the other image sprites, the other two image sprites, go away. All right, so we'll give it a try. And just crashed. Reset. Do it again. All right, so let's try again. Move this. 2 seconds. And here's Barbie and launching in the wrong direction because I never set the direction. Okay, but I got several things working. Okay, one is wherever I click, can appears at that spot. Two is I can get Barbie to start moving, even though she was moving in the wrong direction. She was moving. All right. So now we can go back to blocks and say, okay, we got most of the stuff working, except I forgot to change the direction of Barbie. She's supposed to face Ken after we set the two images in the right at the right locations. So now we go to image sprite 2 and we change the heading. Now to change the heading to face a particular target, we can just use this one. Okay, this block is very handy for this purpose. So we just stick it here, and then the target of Barbie is Ken. That just sounds really funny. So we just move all the way down here and make image sprite 3 the target of image sprite 2. That would change the orientation of Barbie. And then we go back to our simulator and retest the code. Oops. And that part works, except there's no detection of when to stop. So I just need the logic to specify when to stop, and I'm all done. Okay. So go back to blocks again, and this time I need to detect the collision of the two sprites. Now you can use either the collision event of sprite 2 or the collision event of sprite 3, but in either case you have to check who is colliding with whom, because it is possible that you have the drone colliding with either one, and you're not supposed to stop if it's just a drone colliding. So in this case, we'll need to use the conditional statement in either case, and you can use either sprite 2 or sprite 3. I'm just going to pick sprite 2 here. So in sprite 2, I will use the collided with block here, which means that this will activate as soon as image sprite 2, which is Barbie, collides with something. Okay, it could be Ken, could be the drone itself, and it will basically say put a conditional statement here. We'll only do something if it is colliding with Ken. Okay, that's the only thing. That's the only time we want to do something. So we want to use a math block here for the equality check. This is something that we talked about last time already, is to compare what I'm colliding with, or what Barbie is colliding with. I'm not Barbie. And you'll specify Ken, image sprite 3, as the other one to compare to. So if image sprite 2 is colliding with something, and that something turned out to be the Ken image sprite, then we'll stop Barbie. Okay, we'll tell Barbie, hey, stop moving. And let's see, make it to stop. We just set the speed to 0, or we can make it disabled. Okay, we can just turn image sprite to disable. But I think in class I only talked about how to use the speed to make it stop moving. So we just make it stop moving by setting the speed to 0. Okay. So now we go back to the simulator and you'll see if that works. Okay. Touch anywhere on the screen to disable both sprites, and move it around a little bit. And as the arrow is moving, and here's Barbie flying to Ken, and it stops while the drone is still flying. There we go. Right. So are there any questions about this? No? Okay. As I was writing this code, I was thinking about another politically incorrect, version of this thing here. Tear gas grenade and yellow umbrellas. Does anyone know what I'm referring to? No? The situation in Hong Kong? It became what they call the umbrella, thing,
I wanted to show you.
Okay,
See, that thing takes that without calling and with just setting the reference to the image sprite 1/coordinates. It's already been centered in there because of the first call when it originally started doing its when it's for the block that's moving the arrow, it actually makes that the X, because you can see the missile is centered with the line, and it also is centered with the arrow when it moves.
Okay. Well, when I grade it, I will take a look. Okay.
I just wanted to offer that as a
Okay.
possible other solution for the class. But
Okay. Well, without actually seeing your code, I can't really completely understand what you're referring to. Okay. So, are there any questions about the solution of this particular homework? Questions about this? Yep.
I guess my question about zero, and I was really kind of pondering between disabled and zero yesterday, and I thought disabled would be a more of a finalized thing. I mean, because technically that image sprite is it technically moving even though it's at zero? Or
Yes,
not?
it is. It's getting updated. 10 times per second.
Right.
That is
So if
correct.
we disable it, we're logically doing better
We do
by
not
closing
know-
it off in the
right,
program.
we don't
and
know
not
what's-
taking another process up, right?
Right. One implementation will definitely indicate that. All right. So this is done. I'm going to upload the solution. So I will go ahead and save my project and upload this one so that you have a solution to this particular homework assignment. I don't think it is completely done in the sense that it doesn't start from the center of the drone. Okay. So I would go ahead and actually fix that if I had the time. I will save this project first and export selected project to my computer, and I think it knows which one. Yep. So this one is called Tracker 2. I will upload it back to Moodle so that this way you have a copy of this one. And then we'll talk about your final project because we have to start to do something with your final project. I'm pretty sure most of you are busy thinking about how to do it, but I'm going to give you a kind of more detailed plan of how to go about doing it, and also you can kind of document it and use the feedback as a homework assignment. So I have something to hold on and say, okay, I know you know what you're doing. Okay. All right, so we'll go back to this one and we'll add one more file to it, which is the solution to this one. So file, add. We'll call this tracker that shoots solution. File. This one's tracker 2. And I had to change it. Yeah, any power outage, in ARC should not affect the Moodle server because the Moodle server is not even here. Huh?
Yeah, it's not here.
It's not here.
Unless,
Right.
of course, it's a more widespread outage.
And we have a bigger problem, yes. Because that also means that all the traffic lights, will be impacted, Yep. Okay, so now we talk about the project plan, which is, the main event of today. But first of all, I have to make it visible. So just hold on 1 second here. Alright, so it should be visible to you now. So you can, if you want to, you can click on it and instead of watching the screen. Okay, it is time that we get started with our final project because we have talked about most, if not all, of the App Inventor 2 features that you can use in your project. Almost all the blocks are now explained. Okay, and I have several programs, sample programs to show you how to make use of those blocks and components. With the project proposal, we went over reasons why someone might want to download and install your app. So those are basically saying, okay, why would anyone want to buy or just download and install your application? What is it bringing to to the end user? It is now time for us to figure out how to implement your application to meet those objectives/values. Okay, so we're trying to make connections back to your own objective and values that you have documented in the use case diagram. The first step you might want to do, in case you have not been thinking about your final project, is to revisit your own proposal. Look at the use case diagram again to remind yourself what you were planning to do originally. And then you can come up with a list of features. So a feature is basically an ability to do something for your in your application, and it should connect to one of the use cases of your application. You were only required to have 2 use cases in the use case diagram, so whatever feature you want to list here has to be connected to at least one of the 2 use cases. Some may be connected to both, but most only connect to one. So you want to start with a list of features so that you can basically say, okay, my app can now do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and so on. Okay. Can everybody differentiate between what an application, the feature list of an application, from the use cases of an application? A use case is why someone might want to download the application. Okay, I want to do banking online. Okay, that's the reason why I want to have a particular application. A feature is basically saying, okay, so exactly what can you do with this application? Okay. I want to be able to check my balance. That's a feature. Okay, I want to be able to deposit a check. That's a feature. Those turn out to be use cases as well. Okay, so let me try to think of a feature that is not a use case. Changing my username. Okay, now changing the username is not really a use case, because who would want to order, or not order, but who would want to download and install an application just so that that person can change the username with an online banking account? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? But to download an application, just so that you can deposit a check online without having to go to the bank, and instead you just take a picture of the check that you want to deposit, that seems to me that is something of, it would be something of value to certain people. How many people do that, by the way, in this class? Do online check deposit?
If I could, I would.
I do.
Occasion.
Yep.
Occasion.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good. They have changed the application where before they would let you take a picture and they tell you in text, what needs to be included in the picture. But if it doesn't meet the requirement, it'll just ask you to take the picture again and again and again and again and again. Okay, but now it actually does a live thing, so it analyzes the image live as you move your camera around on top of the check. When it is at the right time, it covers just the right range of the check. It clicks and it snaps the picture. So these days, you don't have to take the picture again and again and not knowing, why is it not meeting the requirement. Now it gives you a frame of the shape of a check, and you just have to place it on top, just about right, and then it will take the picture automatically when it is at the right position, which is kind of cool. Now, because the resolution of cameras are so good these days, I think eventually they don't even have to do that. You can take the picture like slanted, offset, rotated and whatnot, and the software should be able to do all the correction to get the check right again. You should be able to even crumble the check, just lay it out again, crumbled, and the image processing should be able to reverse that and go like, yeah, I can still see it. Or
Give me a real challenge. Oh, yeah, give me a real challenge.
Yeah. Crumble into a ball and then just spread it out again, and you should still be able to do it. So anyway, so I'm just connecting, the features to use cases here. So another feature that you might want to be able to do is to enable or disable zoom, automatic zoom, let's say for check deposit. Okay, so this way, you can say, yeah, I kind of trust the app. I know it knows how to control the zooming if you have a zooming type of camera on your phone. So it will automatically zoom to the right magnification to take a picture of the check. So turning it on and turning it off would be a feature, but it's not by itself a use case, right? Who would download an app and install it just so they can automatically zoom in and out to take a picture of a check, right? But without the online deposit thing, right? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So once you have a list of all the features of what your app should be able to do, then you can start with the screen layout. Okay. Now with this list here, it's going to be fairly long for a lot of applications. What you want to do is not to start off thinking, okay, I want to make a very ordered and structured list, okay, to begin with. Just put in items into this list as it flows up in your mind, okay? Do the organization later. Just think about what you want the app, or what features you want to implement in the app, and then worry about organization as a second step. It's just like, writing an English paper or something like that. Now, once you have all the features, now you can organize your screens and the layout of the screens. Unless you have an application that is very dynamic in nature, in the sense that everything is drawn in a canvas, screen design is a good way to start with your application, to actually do something in AI2 as a starting point. Okay. Particularly because AI2, when you switch to the designer view, this is a fairly interactive screen. I mean, you see for the most part what you actually get. Okay, I wouldn't say completely, but for the most part, you see what you're going to get when you're actually running the application. So this is not a bad way to start with your application. So back to the homework assignment here. Now, each screen should have a particular purpose and group all the related user interface elements within that particular screen. So at this point, don't worry about anything that is hidden, okay? Like a clock, okay, that's hidden. TinyDB, that's hidden, okay? So don't even worry about those components that is not displayed in the screen. Just start with stuff that is visible in the screen, and design your screens. Just do the layout of your screens using this particular method. Now within a screen, you want to organize your user interaction component in a logical manner, or at least make it easy for a user to locate a particular component. Instead of having to actually read through the whole thing, just organize it in a way that makes sense to most people. So you might want to start with maybe 3 screens, okay? You might want to start with a splash screen. Most applications start with a splash screen just so they can display the logo, copyright, notice, and a button to start the actual application. You can include a little checkbox and say, do not show this screen again, okay? So this way, for people who don't want to wait for the delay or have to press the start button in the splash screen, they can just skip this one. Now, how do you actually implement it? With a default to show the splash screen, but an option to turn it off so that it doesn't show. Come on, you guys can figure this out. Okay, all App Inventor applications, they must start with screen 1. So that makes screen 1 the only choice for a splash screen. Okay, so now the question is, how do you make it optional? You will need to use TinyDB, because the setting has to be saved.
The timeout of your splash screen. Have it change the timeout of your splash screen.
But you have to remember the preference, right?
Right.
So you have to. So you need a TinyDB in the splash screen to load that one component. If that particular key is located and the value says, okay, from here on I do not want to see the splash screen, then you can go from the splash screen to the main screen directly. So in the initialize block of the splash screen, you can just go ahead and start the next screen. Okay, so that's one way to get around the problem of the splash screen. The main screen is where most of your feature would go. Okay, the main feature, right? Of your application has to go to the main screen. You might need multiple main screens. Okay, if your application is kind of complicated, or each item in your screen is kind of big and you can only fit a few on the screen. And you might want to consider a configuration screen for stuff that are optional. Okay, so there are default settings, but if the end user so want to change some of the default settings, you might have a separate screen just for the configuration, which makes sense. So are there any questions about how to organize your screens into main screens, main categories, and then within each screen you can then also do the layout for the individual components? Any questions about this? Now, the first time you do this, you may not want to do it in AI2 because in AI2, stuff is kind of difficult to move things around. Okay, especially if you use the horizontal or the vertical layout, stuff. It's not bad, but sometimes it doesn't give you the flexibility to move things around the way you want them sometimes. So you can also use some other software to do it initially. So for this part of your homework assignment, I want you to take screenshots of your screen layouts, just the portion. Okay, I don't need the entire screen, and you can include it in your plan. Okay, this is going to be written using the HTML editor of Moodle, so you can include images and you can upload files and stuff like that.
So wait, we use HTML to do the mockups then?
You can certainly use HTML to do the markup, but it may not be. It may be easier just to take a screenshot of AI2.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, the implementation is kind of starting. We're starting to get into the more difficult part. As far as the implementation is concerned, the first thing I would do is to make an inventory of what AI2 supports. Okay. That is not too hard because to understand what type of component you can have in AI2, all you have to do is to go through each category and say, okay, as far as user interaction components are concerned, what can I do? Okay, we have all of these components here, and if you cannot remember how to use one of them, you can just click the question mark here, and also click more information if you want to get even more information than just the brief description here. Or if you want to do the layout thing, there are only 3 layout components. If you want to include any type of multimedia content, you can look into this one here, and so on. Okay, so this is a good way to start, is to think about, okay, now I know what features I want to implement in my application. Let me start with the components of AI2 and see which components may be appropriate for what I want to do in the application. Is that working out okay so far? Because sometimes we kind of forget, okay, I want to play the explosion sound, okay, when the 2 sprites collide, or a swooshing sound in this case, okay. So how do I play that swooshing sound when Barbie reaches Ken?
Sound.
Yep. So we can just go to sound. That would be a good starting point at least, right? I mean, so you go to sound, you click the question mark. It says a multimedia component that plays sound files and optionally vibrate for the number of milliseconds specified in the block editor. Well, sounds like what we want to do, right? Now, we have already done one project using sound. Which one was it? Yep, Hello Per. The very first homework was already using this particular component. So this is what I was talking about. Just go through the inventory and find out what component may be helpful to implement a particular feature. Yep.
Can I ask you, what would be a good, when I went on to look for instance, a missile sound last night, it brought me up a bunch of YouTube videos, mostly videos to opt for sound.
Okay.
How can we
extract
is
the
there something that we can
soundtrack?
extract the sound from the video when we download it?
Well, first of all, you have to get the video file first, okay?
Right.
Well,
I
you
was
don't
able
have
to do
but
that.
that would be handy.
I was able to do that.
Okay, then you can use, I personally use Linux, so my tools are a little bit different.
VLC I use on Linux.
Yeah,
You guys
VLC can
go
extract
to,
it.
Yeah. You go to.
Is it convert?
Yeah, convert,
Yeah.
and then tell it to do just like say export as MP3 or whatever.
And then you can either extract only a portion, or you can extract the entire thing and then use Audacity to get to a portion
what
and
you
just
want.
say,
Yeah.
yep.
VLC just strips the audio out,
VLCIU?
saves it, huh?
VLCIU.
VLC, yeah.
Where would you just look it online? You'll find it.
You have
Just look up VLC.
Oh, VLC.
Video LAN,
Okay.
Yeah.
official page for VLC Media Player.
don't you
It's
have
open
that
source.
installed?
Huh?
Don't you have that installed on your?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, if you go, I think it's yeah under. Let's see. Go to.
Yeah, VLC looks the same, regardless
Yeah,
of the platform.
Media,
So you can go into media.
convert, save,
Yeah, let me convert, save.
and then
Is that the source?
Yeah.
Yeah, this has to be the source.
Yeah.
So for the source, I can pick one of my own lectures.
There we go.
The last one.
There we go. And then go down to the bottom, convert save, yeah, and then convert.
And then you can specify
go profile, select.
just the audio.
There you go.
So you can pick MP3, which is fairly common. You know, it would work for App Inventor
Definitely.
for sure. And then
of
you can
course,
just specify the
use
destination
Audacity,
file.
Convert it.
Yep.
Yeah, and then just
Thank
tell
you.
it what you want to save it as.
Yep. I actually use VLC to do screen recording when I do not have a Linux. Yep, because it can do that as well.
Just remember, do not have the repeat on when you're doing it. It causes a problem.
What? Say again?
If you try and convert while repeat is on, it won't stop. It just keeps trying to convert it repeatedly.
Ah, okay. That kind of makes sense.
Made that mistake.
Okay, so this is good for converting a video and extract the sound out of it. And then the other one is called Audacity, which is a audio editor / recorder thing.
Great tool.
So it's an extremely great tool, because if you try to take anything off of let's say VHS, there's usually that 60 hertz hum, because the recording equipment is not professional grade and stuff like that. And with Audacity, you can take a sample of what is supposed to be completely silent, and you can say this is supposed to be completely silent, okay, and then it can extract the characteristic of the quote unquote noise of the audio part, and then you can say, okay, now I want to denoise the entire track, and it will apply that to the entire track. So if there's a kind of annoying 60 hertz hum in your audio part, it would just take that off of the entire track. Now, if you become too aggressive with this, it would degrade the actual audio quality, but it is a feature to kind of play with. It's kind of cool. I used to do that with Wiggles video, because my kids like Wiggles. Yeah. That's my reaction as well. But I don't have a video player in my car. I used to have just a CD player in the car, so I had to extract the audio of all the video stuff and put it into the so I can play that music in the car. Yeah. So Audacity is a great tool. It works really well with video land. They're completely different, separate, independent applications, but they work together really well.
Yeah.
Yep. And they're open source as well, so you don't have to pay a dime.
PortableApps.com, I believe they have portable installations of
Yep.
both of them.
Yep. Yeah, this is true.
Which is nice to have.
Right. So getting back to the homework assignment. So you want to make an inventory of stuff that you wanted, you might be, so that you can identify things that might be helpful for your application. The hidden stuff is also important. Okay, so when I refer to the hidden stuff, I'm referring to things that are not visible. So when you go to media, for one thing, most of these things are not visible, but yet they are also very useful. Sound recorder is not actually visible, okay, because if you drag it to here, it would appear as an invisible or non-visible component. Other things that are not visible are the sensors. Okay, if your application requires you to count the number of steps or something like that, it will come into this particular category. So I would just kind of go through each category just slowly. Okay, it's not going to take you long. It will take you maybe 15 minutes or so to go through all this list here, just to find out which one may be helpful. Storage is definitely useful because TinyDB is here, as is file. Okay, so both of these can be very useful even in simple applications. Even if you don't want to go to TinyWebDB or Fusion Tables, which is online, these can still be useful components. Yep.
What's the purpose of file?
Well, a file is just a file. You can use a file to write or read files on your device. Any file. Now, it has to be file that belong to your particular application, because Android has a very strict system where one application does not have permission to open does not have permission to files of another application, which makes sense, right? You don't want that to happen.
The Linux.
Huh?
It's what the browsers do.
Well, the browsers only has certain file access.
Yeah.
Yeah, but an application has complete access to everything that it creates.
The criteria are slightly different, but the browsers try to keep pages from trumping on other pages' integrity. They try.
Right. Well, it's a slightly separate issue because as far as the browser is concerned, it is one application. So the different pages that you load up, in the browser, they're all a part of the data of quote unquote the browser itself. What the browser needs to protect is what is the data or the cookies of one page from another page, from another site.
I should use my words more clearly. We're talking about the same thing. I should have used my words more clearly.
Right. But the browser cannot have access to the data or files of another application of your Android device, which is a good thing. Okay, so this allows you to basically save any file or to open any file.
That's because like each application on Android is a quote different user. As far as Android is concerned, it uses the Linux kernel's ability
Yes.
to.
I noticed that.
Yeah, I was reading about that last night.
Which is actually not a bad way of doing
No.
it. Windows really does not do that. Windows has
No,
pretty
Windows
much
doesn't
wide
give a
open.
care.
Yep. If you save anything into your own profile in Windows, it is read-writable to any application that you are running. So there's no protection.
That it can handle,
Hmm?
and not always something that it can actually handle either.
Oh,
You
interesting.
can actually tell VLC to open HTML pages. It will crash, but you can tell it to do it.
But this can be helpful. Okay, there was a question a little bit earlier of how can we have multiple TinyDB. This is kind of a get around way of doing it, because what you can do is we already have a way to convert anything to string, to a text, right? Now we have a way to read and write text files, okay? So what you can do is now, you can say, okay, this is one particular thing. It is by itself a list. It can be a very long list, can be a complicated, structured, okay? But you can just say, okay, I'm gonna save this list using JSON encoding into this file. And then from your application, you can read back from that file and reconstitute that list later on. So you have another way on top of TinyDB to save your files, to save content, whatever you want to save. Is that making any sense?
It
Go
doesn't
ahead.
rely on TinyDB, does it?
This one is completely independent to TinyDB. So you don't have to use XML encoding. This one is completely different. In fact, if you drag it into your application and then go to the blocks, you will be able to find exactly what you can do with it. Which is the other thing that you should do is after you take an inventory and identify components that you think will be helpful to your application, you can drag it into your viewer, okay? Go to the blocks and click on that particular component. In this case, it would be file 1, and find out what you can do with it. Okay, so with file 1, we can certainly see that when file 1 got text, that's an event, which is kind of interesting. The event indicating that the content from the file have been read, and it has been read into this parameter. So that means when you say I'm reading from this file, that block returns right away. But this event is going to be triggered when the reading, quote-unquote reading, is done. You can append to a file, you can delete a file, you can read from a file, you can save text into a file based on a particular file name, and you can refer to the file component itself so that later on, if you need to, you can go to any components and use the file related operation here and plug it in as a component.
Right.
So you can write subroutines to process files, and then later on you can call the same subroutine on different files. I think you will find this useful. So are there any questions about the file component? So once again, we are locating components that are not visible. Okay, they're non-visible components, but yet they can be very useful in your application. Connectivity can be helpful as well, especially activity starter. For instance, if your application has something to do with location, okay, So your application keeps track of a list of clients or whatever, okay? And eventually you want to show a picture of a route, to go from your current location to a destination based on your application. You can use Activity Starter to go to Android Maps or Google Maps and basically plot a route, and it becomes somewhat seamless between your application and Google Maps. So that can be helpful also in a particular type of application. Or if your application needs to connect to the web, the web component can be useful as well. Now the web component here is a non-visible component because this particular component is supposed to interact with the website, but on the back end. Okay, so it gives you the connectivity without displaying anything in HTML. If you want to display anything in HTML, it becomes a part of the user interface, and you have to use a web viewer instead of the web component if you want to show a particular web page as a component of your screen, which can come in handy as well. Okay, now this part can come in very handy if you want to maintain a help file or help tutorial for your application, but you don't want to include the documentation in your application itself. Then you can use a web viewer component to go to a particular URL that has all the documentation of your application. Then you can update the documentation anytime you want to, make it more complete, add additional stuff to it without changing your application itself. So that can certainly come in handy, if you use the web viewer component. The web viewer component is not a full-blown web browser, so certain features do not work. Like you cannot insert like bookmarks and stuff like that. But it is useful as a window to a particular HTML document from within your application. Right. So getting onto this stuff here. So make a list of things that your app needs to track. So those would be the data items that you need to track. I think many of your applications require, has something to track, like customers, inventory, number of steps taken, a log of some kind, and so on and so forth. So those are the things that you need to track. For each item, identify whether the item is transient, which means it only needs to be maintained whenever your application is running, or whether something needs to be persistent, which means when you close the application, shut down your phone and then start your phone again and restart the application, that has to be retained. Okay, so you have to kind of identify whether it is just an application variable that does not need to be maintained in a file or TinyDB, or whether it is something that you want to maintain in a TinyDB. So this is going to be a big, long list. Okay, don't try to do it all in your head. It's not going to work. Okay.
Unless you're Von Neumann.
Sorry?
So unless you're Von Neumann.
Yes, unless you are John von Neumann. Yes, yeah, he is one of the very few geniuses who is both intellectual, he can process a lot of information, and remember just about everything. He's called the geniuses. He's called the genius of geniuses. When he was over at was it Stanford or Princeton? Princeton. When he was in Princeton, he had an office next to I think Einstein. They were at about the same time at Princeton, and John von Neumann is a noisy one. Let's just say he likes to play loud polka music, and Albert Einstein probably was not a big fan of polka music.
Played in a string quartet all his life. Einstein.
But not polka.
Beethoven.
Beethoven. So but anyway, the story basically says von Neumann just ignored all the other big shots around him and just go like, I like my music, sorry. But he's actually a very bright guy, multi-talented kind of person. He died way too early because of his participation in the H-bomb. Okay, so getting back up here. Just start jotting down items as they float to the surface of your consciousness. When you see items that are related, group them together. Okay? In other words, let these items coalesce as you spend more time thinking about it. It takes time. Okay? The solar system doesn't come to be the way it is just by clicking and dropping a few planets in the sun, right? I mean, it takes a lot of time for the cloud to start to coalesce and to become larger bodies of stuff, eventually cooling down to become planets and stuff like that. It's the same thing with your application. That's why you need to start thinking now, okay? Because this stuff is not going to happen just overnight. And this part is the interesting part, okay? So on one hand, I ask you to think about your application from the user interface perspective, okay? Make your screens, take some snapshots of your screens and include it, okay? What kind of buttons do you want? List boxes, list pickers, and here's a text box, here's a label, and so on and so forth. And I want to organize things like this and that way and whatnot. On the other hand, I want you to think about what kind of data items you need to track from your application's perspective. So how do we connect all of these things? Well, one type of representation is really good for connecting things is a matrix. Okay? So use a matrix, to help you do something like this. This is the part where I can just use a whiteboard, but it is actually written in the description of how to do it. And this one is gone. This one is probably gone too because the cap is it's not completely gone. Okay, so use a matrix. A matrix is the name of a movie, but it is also a table. Awful movie for the second and the third one. Okay, so now you have a table. So with a table, you have rows and columns. So what you want to do is to list user interface items for rows. So each row is representing a particular user item. And then use the columns to represent data items. So when you see, this user interface item is connected to this particular, there goes another one, is related to this particular data item, just comment here and say why this particular user interface item is related to this data item. So this way you have a matrix of how every user interface item can possibly relate to any particular data item. Okay, it just helps you make the connection because once you can see that this is connected to that, then you can start to think about, okay, but how is it connected? What am I supposed to do with the data when someone clicks this button? Is that kind of making sense? Yep.
Kind of like an IPO chart, but more
kind of like
more strategized to like an IPO chart. But
IPO chart.
Input processing output chart.
Kind of like that,
okay.
Yeah. Because one is it's not exactly input output. It's more like user action and data item. Okay. So use a table to help you with this. You don't have to include like a really detailed table because it can get pretty big with this one. And the HTML editor is not really good at editing tables. It can do it, but it's not particularly good at it. So for this part, use a spreadsheet program to help you. Use Excel or OpenOffice or Google Spreadsheet and give you a link. That works even better. Okay, now I don't want to hear a single word about I don't have a Google account.
Yes, you do.
Because everybody has a Google account on this campus. Yep, apps.losreals.edu. Use it, okay? It is sanctioned by the college district that it is secure enough for homework assignment purposes. So rest assured that your privacy is perfectly respected.
If you have an Android device, you also have one.
If you have an Android device and you link your Android device to a Google account, then you also have one, yes. Now, since this is a mobile programming class, I want to point out that your Android device can have direct access to your Google Documents, and you can actually edit spreadsheets using a particular application. It's not really the best. It's kind of hokey, but it works. But it doesn't work on apps.losreals.edu. There's no way to link a Google account to your student account at apps.losreals.edu. I tried already. I called the help desk and they say, yeah, we got that feature turned off.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm still using it.
I think it might have to do with to enable that feature. They also have to enable the email part of apps.losreals.edu, but that part is disabled for staff and faculty. You guys have, the Gmail account, and you can actually have Gmail access. We don't. They particularly turn that feature off so that we have to use Exchange. No, I'm not kidding. We have to use Exchange when you guys have Gmail.
Seems like a waste of money.
Well, it creates all kinds of problems because now it's two different systems. Yep.
You think they just merge, you guys don't use Gmail.
I have no idea why they want to keep Exchange, but that's
Money.
a decision.
Sure, there's money involved.
Maybe. Okay, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit here. So how do you make these connections? When you identify one of the cells here that says, this particular user interface component is connected to this particular data item, how do you make the actual connection? Well, it's going to be some kind of code, some kind of block that's going to do it. Okay, so you have to kind of figure out what kind of block is going to change the display of something to reflect the result of some kind of analysis, some kind of processing, or when someone clicks on a button, okay, what is it going to do? What happens when you see one of these rows being completely empty, or one of these columns being completely empty? In other words, let's say you pick one particular user interface component, and the entire row is empty. It means it is not connected to any data item that you have outlined in your application. And what is that telling you? Something is not right. Okay? So as you are writing these things, you might find that you need additional data items because no user interface element or component is supposed to have an empty row. And the same thing goes for columns too. If you have one column for one particular data item that has no user interface component connected to it, then you also have a problem, okay? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense, okay? Because everything has to make use of data item eventually, okay? Maybe not directly, but indirectly they all must have connections to data items. So I'm gonna end today's lecture at this point. This is due next week. You have 1 week to work on this. This will take some time, okay? So start on this as early as possible. And if you guys need to, we can talk about it on Wednesday also.
We come up with a basic whatever, and we come up with other things later.